Okay, guys, we're finally here. Game of Thrones, Episode 5 review. Finally here at long last. So, if you haven't seen Episode 5 yet or watched Game of Thrones, there's going to be a lot of spoilers. So, be warned. Okay, so just a basic summary of this episode. In the beginning, Lord Varys suggests to Jon that he should take the throne as Daenerys is unstable. Tyrion then rats out Varys, and Varys is then executed. The northern forces, along with the Unsullied and the Dothraki, attack King's Landing and take the city. Drogon destroys the Iron Fleet, and the Lannisters are defeated. A bell is rung to signify the surrender of the city, and the Lannister troops surrender. However, Daenerys continues burning the city, prompting the sacking of King's Landing. During this chaos, Sandor Clegane faces off against the Mountain, and we finally get the Clegane Bowl. Cersei flees the Red Keep and is reunited with Jaime Lannister. And then they are promptly killed by falling debris. Arya, who comes into the city with the Hound, escapes the carnage and rides away on a white horse. And then the credits roll. So that's the synopsis of the episode. Now, just to start off, people were concerned that because we had the Battle of Winterfell in episode 3, people were concerned that the King's Landing wouldn't be as climatic or wouldn't be as important. Well, I think this episode was actually, in terms of significance, either matched Winterfell or exceeded it. So I think, I don't think it was, overshadowed at all. Starting with the visuals are amazing. They're great. The fire that emits from Drogon's mouth, the explosions, the carnage, the beautiful scenery of King's Landing, they're all conveyed extremely well. Effects are great. I think they've done an excellent job. The wide shots of King's Landing are extremely well done. And I think in terms of visuals, one of my favorite scenes is when Sandor Clegane is facing the mountain inside the Red Keep, and behind them is a blown out wall, and you can see the dragon fly behind them, and it's a mesmerizing picture. It feels like someone made a painting. Now let's move on to the plot and characters. This is where I think this episode is lacking. There's serious concerns about the writing. It's very rushed. There's a lot of inconsistencies. So let's dive in. So firstly, Drogon and Dany. Why did Rhaegal die so early? We saw that in the previous. I think I'm getting the name right. I'm pretty sure there's the Dany rides Drogon and not Rhaegal. But anyways, we saw in the last episode, in episode 4, one of the dragons was killed. Was it just a plot device so Daenerys would be slightly more weaker? I don't know, because the dragon that she was riding on in this episode completely destroyed the city. I don't think they even needed any troops, to be honest. That one dragon could have won the entire battle because he freaking annihilated King's Landing and all the troops along with it. So I think the death of the dragon in the previous episode was just a cheap way of making Daenerys slightly less overpowered. She was still overpowered, but just slightly less. Moving on to Lord Varys. Lord Varys is such an excellent character. I feel like he symbolized the old school Game of Thrones that we saw in episode 1 to 4. He was a schemer, he was a politician, and he survived because of these traits. But in the last couple of seasons, he hasn't had much of a role. You can see him in a couple scenes, walking behind Daenerys, maybe, saying a couple lines here and there, but he basically hasn't played a big part in Game of Thrones in the last couple seasons. Well, he finally does something, and it's a really, I would say, it's just a way to get him. It's just a way for the writers to get him off the show. You know, he sends off ravens. It's implied that he sends off ravens to tell other lords about Jon's lineage, and a lot of people are speculating that he tried to poison Daenerys because one of his spies was working in the kitchen, and then he mentions that quote, we'll try again at supper or something. So a lot of people think this is him trying to poison Daenerys. I certainly think this theory is plausible because that's old school. That's old school plotting and scheming of Game of Thrones. But unfortunately, this is pretty much what's left of Varys this season. He meets Jon on the beach, and he pretty much openly speaks of treason. He basically says, "Oh, Jon, you should take the throne instead." Lord Varys is the master of whispers, so it's kind of jarring that we see him pretty much openly discussing the idea of treason. Um, and later, he gets betrayed by Tyrion. Tyrion pretty much um, tells on him to Daenerys, and he is then executed by Drogon burning him. He did go out like a G, though, because he didn't scream at all. He took the fire like a man. So it's disappointing that Varys died. Really loved his character. I love the contrast between him and Peter Baelish. Peter Baelish he was like the devil. He thrived in chaos, while Varys, he served the realm. I guess he was the only selfless, pretty much, he was the only person who had concern about the normal people of Westeros. So I just, love that dichotomy. And, he just got reduced from a great character to kind of a shitty one because of the writing. Even the actor that played Varys commented on how he felt so useless and underutilized these past couple of seasons. Moving on to Tyrion, I don't really have that much to say about Tyrion. He's not one of my favorite characters. I don't dislike Tyrion, but I also don't like him, that much as a character. So I don't have that much to say. He had an excellent emotional moment with Jaime. Pretty much that was the last time they would see each other again. So there was an emotional moment between them, which was really great. And a lot of fans were upset that as the seasons progressed, he got progressively more stupid and, kept giving Daenerys bad advice. So a lot of people saw that there were some inconsistencies with his character. Let's see. Moving on to Euron Greyjoy. A lot of people say, and I tend to agree, that this Euron Greyjoy is not done very well in Game of Thrones. He is pretty one-dimensional. He's pretty much just like an angry, loudmouth pirate, and but he has so much screen time, and he's doing so big, important stuff, but he's just super one-dimensional. I guess the writers just really wanted him dead, because to be honest, so Euron is firing on the dragon from his boats, and when his ship gets sunk by Drogon, he dives into the water, and you would think, hey, there's a big battle going on. I'm going to escape, take a ship, and just row away. Oh, but he just magically has to swim ashore next to Jaime Lannister and decides to confront Jaime and gets killed. So it's really stupid how they got rid of his character like that. And it wasn't even a great fight. So it was pretty disappointing. So Euron Greyjoy, really anticlimactic. I don't know why, we focused on him so much. Maybe it was just a cheap, stupid way for Cersei to get the Golden Company, or for them to kill a dragon by introducing his character. So I feel like he was he didn't need to be in the. You could even cut him off from the show. Next up on this list is Arya. Stark and Sandor Clegane, the Hound. I love this little dialogue they had near the end, before the Clegane Bowl. The Arya tells, oh sorry, the Hound tells Arya that she shouldn't travel the same path as him. She shouldn't be focused on revenge because it's only going to lead to death, and that's what the Hound is going to do. He has to do one last thing, and Arya need not follow. And so when Sandor walks away, Arya calls the Hound by his real name, Sandor, and thanks him. And I love this little moment because it really humanizes the Hound, and it's really the first time anyone has called him by his real name. And I found that was a really touching moment. And to be honest, the Sandor, he had a really good arc throughout Game of Thrones. He started off kind of, like a disgruntled evil jerk, and he started becoming more selfless and started becoming more caring. He watched over Arya. He joined the Brotherhood Without Banners. He joined that little community that was unfortunately massacred by bandits. And he went north of the Wall and ultimately fought in the Battle of Winterfell. So he had a really great arc that ultimately led him back to fighting the Mountain as his last goal. So I think they did the story of Sandor very well. Okay, let's see. Oh, we got Jaime Lannister. Jaime Lannister. Man, the writers really butchered his story. He freaking came back to Cersei Lannister. Oh, nope, it wasn't to kill her like so many fans had thought, but it was to be with her. Oh, God. Years of character development just went straight down the gutter in this episode. Think about Jaime's journey. He went from a guy in episode 1 of the first season who pushed Bran out of a window, or he pushed out Bran out of a tower. This guy was a fucking scumbag. He fought Ned Stark. He didn't give a shit that Cersei blew up the Sept of Baelor. This guy was an asshole. But he slowly, very slowly redeemed himself. He developed a relationship with Brienne of Tarth. He ditched Cersei to go fight for the armies of the living in the north, and he fought the White Walkers and all of that. And he knighted Brienne, and it looked like he was turning the corner. But no, he had to come back to freaking Cersei Lannister. What the hell? What the hell, D&D? I would have been so damn happy if he came back to stab Cersei in the back and to be the Kingslayer again, or I guess in this case the Queenslayer. But you know, uh, it's just a shame because you could see his character going in one direction, and then suddenly he came back. He came back just to love Cersei and be with her all over again, like nothing had happened. It's just absolutely frustrating. You know, I I guess it was all right that he did that, but the fact that he and Cersei had that kind of death, it was so stupid. So stupid. Cersei Lannister is the biggest son of a bitch, is the biggest goddamn bitch, biggest villain in Game of Thrones. Everyone fucking hates her. And she gets killed by freaking falling rocks. She couldn't have gotten stabbed. She couldn't have had her throat slit. She got fucking crushed by falling debris. And this is the one villain that everyone freaking hates since day number 1. Everyone hates her. God damn it. And this is how you kill off Cersei Lannister, D&D. What the hell? And you know what? I'm gonna have to admit, I felt bad that Jaime and Cersei died by getting crushed by rocks. And that really shouldn't be happening. They're the goddamn Lannisters. Everyone hates the damn Lannisters. They're like the evilest family in Westeros. But hey, that's D&D writing for you. Okay, anyways, let's move on to the last character, Daenerys. She went bonkers. Now, a lot of people are complaining um, that the whole idea of her becoming the Mad Queen and burning down King's Landing was absurd. But I like I like that she transformed into the Mad Queen, because there was a lot of she was, if you looked at the earlier seasons and episodes of Game of Thrones, she was particularly harsh towards her enemies. She, you know, killed them, executed them, burned them, whatever. So I think it's reasonable that she would become the Mad Queen. My only complaint, and it's a pretty significant one, is the transition between, we needed to see a slower transition of her slowly becoming more and more crazy and more mad. The idea of having bells kind of just trigger her to become insane is just, it's too much. It's done too quickly and feels kind of ham-fisted. So she pretty much had a PTSD moment where she got triggered by these bells that were rung in King's Landing, which initiated her genocide of the population. One more thing that kind of frustrates me about some of the characters of this episode is a lot of people tried to, I guess, justify D&D's writing by kind of making up their own theories and saying like, oh, this totally makes sense because so and so and so and so. But really, as a TV show, you have to show the audience, you know, give the show, don't tell, You can't just have the fans write your show for you. You have to actually show them through clever scenes, dialogue, actions. So I don't get some of the fans of this episode, I really don't. Anyways, let's move on to some more analysis and some highlights. The Battle of King's Landing. I really didn't like this battle. We didn't even see some actual fighting. If you saw, there was a scene where Jon and the Northmen and everyone else was having like a face-off against the Golden Company. Well, they really should have shown these two armies duke it out. They hyped the Golden Company so much, like they were, I guess, apparently in the books, they were a legendary mercenary force. But we didn't get to see this in the show. It would be nice if there was, we saw a charge, we saw lots of sword fights and slaughter and carnage outside of the city. We also needed to see Harry, the leader of the Golden Company. We needed to see him play a more important role because he pretty much didn't do anything. He didn't say anything, didn't do anything. He, as soon as Drogon appeared and burned down the gate, he started running, and then he got stabbed and died. What the hell? Why do you introduce and spend money and time to help to show the Golden Company arrive at Westeros, to show all their soldiers, to show Harry, just to have him die without even fighting? What a waste. What they should have done is show actual fighting between the two armies, perhaps give us a one-on-one sword fight between Jon Snow and Harry, and then you can have Drogon show and blow up the gate and then have him lose the battle. That would have been so much more satisfying. Next is the Clegane Bowl. Well, us fans, we finally got the Clegane Bowl. It was a good fight, but I wish it was a bit longer. And I'm glad that the Hound finally got what he wanted, which was revenge on his brother. There's some really interesting symbolism here because the Hound was very afraid of fire because of the trauma he felt as a young kid. And it was actually kind of sad the way he died. He tackled the mountain, and they both fell out of the tower and into some fire. And I felt genuine sadness that that he died. So I'm glad that I'm glad I'm glad that in the way that I felt satisfied on how his arc finished. Now I do want to say that I didn't enjoy his fight with the mountain. It was great that they fought, but I wish there was some more sword play, because the Hound and the Mountain, they're both legendary warriors in the show. They're both very strong. We should have seen some very violent clashes between them, but we kind of saw some jump cutty scenes of them just like hitting each other. And, um, as soon as the Hound got hit, they would cut away to Arya. So we needed to see a more clear and longer fight between these two monstrosities. Yeah, I'm glad we got to see the sacking of King's Landing. I think that adds a sense of realism to the show. Oftentimes, city sieges aren't clean. You know, when you're fighting in the city, you don't march down the neatly throughout the streets and suddenly you win the battle. Um, the carnage of war shows up. There's going to be looting, burning, killing, raping, pillaging. There's going to be all these terrible things that happen, and I'm glad that the writers showed the audience like this is some of the terrible things that can happen when there's a siege. But my problem is, how remember how earlier I talked about we needed to see some more sword fights and some actual fighting between armies. Well, we saw too much. The director spent too much time on Drogon burning down the city and people running away and getting, burned by the flames. I think it's easier to it's you can show that the dragon is burning down the entire city with a couple scenes. We don't need continuous like displays of carnage over and over and over again. We needed to save that time for actual fighting. So, I am disappointed that we spent so much screen time on that. Now, the last couple points I wanted to make is this episode was really rushed. If you think about it, it's kind of absurd that, in one episode they're leaving Winterfell, which is all the way in the north, and then now they suddenly pretty much teleported to King's Landing, within an episode. It's really goofy. It's really frustrating, absurd. We needed more build up. We needed more, we needed to at least show a scene of them marching or gathering allies from the Vale, maybe allying with Edmure Tully from the Riverlands, or having Howland Reed show up, or the Yara Greyjoy or something. We needed some kind of transition, and we didn't get that. So it feels really silly that and rushed that we suddenly saw these armies of the North teleport straight to King's Landing. Daenerys's arc was rushed. Just with the bells ringing, she suddenly gets triggered and becomes the Mad Queen. So we needed a little bit more background. We needed a little bit more build up and transition, so we can see that transformation is believable. Ultimately, we needed longer seasons. We needed a longer seventh season and a longer eighth season. And the disappointing thing is, HBO was ready. HBO was willing to give D&D those 10 episode seasons, and they were willing to give them the resources they needed to make that happen. But D&D, they insisted that they could wrap the entire season up in just 6 episodes. And you can obviously see that there's a significant drop in writing quality because of that. Now, this episode got like a 6.3 on the Game of Thrones post discussion survey, and I think I think I would rate that. I think that's an appropriate and reasonable score, a 6, a 5 or a 6. Now, with that all being said, I know I said a lot of I had a lot of criticism for this episode. How can we wrap it up to try to salvage the last season, which has been not, you know, not very good. If I might be honest, it's not been a very good season. Okay, so Daenerys has to die. There's no way that Daenerys is going to be living after the shenanigans she pulled. John might kill her, Arya might kill her. If John kills her, I think that makes the most logical sense because they need to resolve that conflict. Um, Obviously, Tyrion will need to be punished somehow for letting Jaime go. Obviously, I think that's worthy of an execution or long term imprisonment. That's Tyrion's going to get punished for letting Jaime out, for probably ratting on and knowing about John's lineage, and you know so he is definitely going to get punished somehow. Now, who will take the Iron Throne? That's going to be an interesting question. If you know me, I'm Team Gendry. I'm Team Baratheon, man. So hopefully Gendry, comes out of the cuts and becomes the the king of Westeros and the Seven Kingdoms and all that. So I'm going Team Gendry. Um, and also I'm interested to see if there's a payoff with the notes that Varys wrote and gave to the Ravens. I'm interested to see if people are going to comment about John's lineage in the next episode. Well, they better because it's the damn last episode. So, there's going to be some interesting questions to be hopefully answered in the finale. And, they really got to work hard to salvage this piece of crap. So, it's just a lot of. I don't even, people have said that critics of the season are just picky, but if you've been invested in the entire series like I have, you want to see some consistent writing. You want to see things that make sense. You want to see the great dialogue, the great writing, and performances that made the series great in the first couple of seasons. And so far, it hasn't been that. So it's been very disappointing. Hopefully, they can end the entire series well enough. I don't expect a perfect ending, but at least we need the viewers, the fans, we need answers. We need some closure. So we'll have to stay tuned for this Sunday. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have an excellent night. Take care.